The crime situation is off the
going
deep
for the
end.
whole state. My husband has cousins down here, and he just decided that this was a better. But we were very happy that we could get out of Minnesota and come down here.
It's good. It's good. Well, I'll tell you, actually, just speaking of that whole Minnesota catastrophe, it really began, it's been brewing for a while, but in 2020 it went downhill.
Well, and Waltz is just, I don't know, you can have an abortion up until the time the baby's born. They're legalizing marijuana.
It's another country.
They want to make, yes. And he said this is the Minnesota miracle, is what he calls it. Yeah.
So what it calls?
Waltz.
Oh, yeah.
Governor.
Minnesota miracle? That's one word for it. Disaster might be what I call it.
I call it that he's Satan's, I feel like he's Satan's advocate because he's just doing more, all he can do. He's
Yeah.
just doing whatever damage, that's what I call it, damage.
It's intentional.
Yeah. Till he gets out and I don't know what
I'm
happens.
glad you're on this side.
But Minnesota's been Democrat for I don't know how many.
When did you move here?
About 4 months ago. We're happy to be
Hopefully
here.
you
We like it. Everybody's
should participate in this Iowa caucus. It's an important part of the tradition of being in the state. Let me open this up, guys. I mean, what are some of the things we might usually not talk about that is of interest to you? I want to open
Nice
this up.
question.
Yeah.
So I was a big Ron Paul supporter.
Oh, good.
So Federal Reserve was a huge
Yes.
topic. What do you propose doing about the inflation for dollar? And I'm very worried about the dollar collapse.
Oh, I mean, you have good reason to be.
Yeah.
And it actually relates to even some of the questions Faith was just talking about, the economic questions. So part of the reason that real wages have not gone up for the last 25 years, and when you say real wages, that means wages adjusted for inflation. They haven't gone up for the bottom 99% of this country for the last 25 years, for the bottom 99%. Why? It's actually because of the actions of the Federal Reserve. A lot of people may not understand this, but the Federal Reserve has treated any uptick in wages as a bad thing. They tighten monetary policy like whack-a-mole every time wages grow up because they've called it a leading indicator of inflation. It turns out that's totally disastrous and wrong. I promised you one business lesson, so I'll give you one here. Wages are generally the last thing to go up in what you call the business cycle, right? Sometimes things are hot, sometimes things are cold. So the last thing to go up as things heat up before the natural downturn, and this is not a bad thing, it's just how the economy works. Wages are the last thing to go up. You have a Federal Reserve since 1997 that has treated that like a bad thing as though it's a leading indicator of inflation. What that means is they tighten monetary policy. They raise interest rates. A, to bring down wages, because they say it's a bad indicator of inflation. But B, it's right when the business cycle is naturally turning down anyway. So if you tighten monetary policy into a downturn of the business cycle, that's what gives you booms but then busts. And then what comes after the bust is nothing other than a bailout. That's what happened in 2008. So anyway, I could go on for a long time about everything that's wrong with the Fed. What are you going to do about it? We need to protect the dollar by pegging it to commodities. Gold, silver, nickel, agricultural and farm commodities. Peg the dollar to goods that actually have, commodities that actually have hard, permanent value. That's what we need to do. That stops the Fed from being able to inflate away the value of the dollar, printing money from on high like it's manna from heaven. That's what allows us to grow this economy. And what you're seeing right now is, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRICS, so-called BRICS alliance, forming a new currency backed by gold, threatening to be the reserve currency of the world as an alternative to the dollar. We have to put an end to that. I think it's a big part of, you're not going to put an end to that by stopping them. You're going to do it by standing for our own dollar, which has inherent value, only if we peg it to those actual basket of commodities. So we haven't done that in a long time. Haven't done it since 1972. We had the most economic growth we've had in this country back when we were on the gold standard. So I think it's a good thing. It's part of what we need to revive. But
So what do you do about the board of Federal Reserve that pretty much acts independently, has no oversight?
yes, so it's a great point. This is my view of being the U.S. president. It's what the Constitution says. Article 2 of the Constitution says there is one executive branch of government, period. Not multiple hundreds of independent, unaccountable agencies. One executive branch. So my view is that all of those people in the executive branch report to the U.S. president. I've run businesses before, right? If somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they do without any authority to actually change it. And I refuse to be that hollowed out husk of a puppet sitting in the White House. That's the hard answer to that question. So my view is I reject that theory. I want to have a 90% headcount reduction across the U.S. Federal Reserve. We don't need 23,000 employees to peg and stabilize the dollar. Stabilize the dollar as a unit of measurement. That fixes a lot of our economic issues. 90% headcount reduction at the U.S. Fed. Part of the problem is you got a bunch of people who show up to work who should have never had that job. They start finding things to do. And that's the real damage that they're doing, is they find the random things to do. That's where the CBDC comes from. And I don't know if you all are familiar with that term. The central bank digital currency. That's right. Where what they're trying to do is to turn your dollar into a digital dollar. What do they want that for? It's what they did to the Canadian truckers.
So they can control it anytime they want.
Exactly. And that's what's coming to this country. It's coming to places like China. China's using it to wipe out your bank account if you say something that the CCP disagrees with. Well, that's coming to the United States of America. Unless we stand up and do something about it. Part of this, though, is the next president needs to actually put the Fed in its place. Their program for this is called what's called the Fed Now program. We need to put an end to that. Put the kibosh on the Fed Now program. And then end the CBDC, but also 90% headcount reduction of the U.S. Fed. Peg the dollar to gold, to commodities. That's how we solve a lot of those misbehaviors. So Ron Paul had the right idea. I'm in this race, though. There's a lot of good candidates who run for U.S. president to move the terms of the conversation. I'm not in this for that. I'm in this to actually get the job done. And so I respect Dr. Paul. I actually spoke to him, about a week ago. We spoke together on his podcast a couple of times. I respect his contributions, but now we need to actually translate a lot of that vision into action. You understand the value of that in Iowa going first. And actually, they as I remember this, in one of those races, they duped him a little bit. They played him dirty. And I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen to me. Where's Matt? Come back. Use our Secretary of State. He'll tell you. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ron Paul episode, but it wasn't exactly a fair caucus that they held. And I think that we're attuned to making sure it's done correctly this time around. It's good to have a former Secretary of State on the team to be able to make sure of that. Yeah. Thanks. You have any memory of that?
No, I do.
Yeah.
And, one of the things, that's one of the things we're asking for precinct captains, because it helps us keep the vote honest, right? And so at your caucus, if you haven't signed up to be a precinct captain, we'd love to have you be there to just read a letter from Vivek and then we have them watch the vote. And then when they call it in, you're able to help keep track of it.
And that was one thing they didn't, I mean, I would have been happy if Ron Paul succeeded in that race, but that was one of the things they didn't do that time around, and so they let themselves get cheated by the system a little bit. And so we got to make sure that doesn't happen this time. It's a great question.
So what are we going to do about all this censorship that's going on with the media and our phones,
It's
and
random.
the FBI?
Yeah, and you know what? I got to say something about this. A lot of this has been coming from the Democratic Party. You think about Jack Smith. You guys know who that is? He's the special counsel they put in charge of the Trump investigation. In his most recent subpoena of the case against Trump, it's not just about Trump. They've demanded anybody who either retweeted or even hit like on one of Donald Trump's posts as part of the investigation. So that's coming from the Democratic Party. But some of the threats to free speech are actually coming from our own Republican Party, right here at home. And take Nikki Haley, for example. She's proposed, and she's a nominally Republican candidate for president, has proposed that if you're using your social media account, you need to have government-issued ID tied to your profile. That's nonsense, because that then allows that government to actually create that same Orwellian nightmare to say, okay, well, Jack Smith gets your social media accounts, now you tie it to your government-issued ID. Back to your question, you tie that to a central bank digital currency, now you like a post they don't like, you get a certain number of dollars in your bank account that's docked. That's where this road ends. Democrats are taking us there, but many Republicans are too, so this goes beyond partisanship. How do we solve this? Right now, it's not big tech censorship. That's what they call it. It's not big tech censorship. It is government tech censorship. The government, the deep state in particular, is using private companies to censor speech through the back door. That they couldn't censor through the front door under the Constitution.
And now
That's what's
I
happening.
just heard today that T-Mobile is going to start going through people's text messages. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
That's, on one hand, downright frightening, and on the other hand, entirely unsurprising.
But
They had AI to do it too, so they can do it at scale.
According to the message that I heard, it was mainly for gun manufacturers and stuff. You know. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the assault on your. I mean, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, they go together. The First Amendment comes first; it protects religious liberty and speech in this country. The Second Amendment comes second because it's the one amendment that protects the first.
Right.
So if they come together in a pair from our founding fathers, they're going to assault them together as a pair for the assault on our own liberties. So I think now more than ever, it takes a president who knows and understands the Constitution. If you're going to swear an oath to the Constitution, you might as well know what it actually says.
Everybody in government loves to wave it around.
Oh, that's right. But very few people have actually even read that Constitution.
Yeah.
And look, this is where, and I alluded to this in the beginning, because you guys have a choice to make. I love Donald Trump and what he stood for this country. But it's going to take a president who can't be duped by that same swamp. You go in to drain the swamp strikes back.
Like they're doing.
It's exactly what you've seen. And I stand by this. You mark my words, they're not going to let the man get anywhere near the White House. But we need a president who can't be duped by that system.
Yeah.
Can't be tricked by the games they play. So they told him, in his case, you can't fire those government employees because of so-called civil service protections. Read the law.
You can lay them off.
Yeah, exactly. Mass firing. See, so the civil service protections say I can't fire you because the whole logic is if you work at, I don't know, the FDA or the FTC or the SEC or God knows what, three-letter alphabet soup, that if I disagree with your views on gun control, that I can't fire you. That's not logic. You can say agree or not, but that's what the rules say. Those rules do not apply to mass firings, mass layoffs. You nailed it. That's what I'm bringing to the DC bureaucracy. 75% of the federal bureaucrats, they're gone by the end of my first term. 50% are gone in the first month. Here's how I do it, actually. You have to do it this way to avoid the lawsuits. Otherwise, they'll sue you into oblivion. If your social security number ends in an odd number, you're out on day one. Period. If it ends in an even number, you're in. On day two, that federal bureaucracy is going to be half its size. The sun will still rise in the east and set in the west, I promise you. Not a thing is going to break. And yet the federal government will be half its size. It's going to take change of that scale to really bring a jackhammer, a chainsaw. You can't bring a chisel to this fight. It's going to take a chainsaw as step one. That's what I'm bringing to the table. And so a lot of those forces for censorship, the pro-censorship forces, come from that administrative state, that deep state.
Yeah.
We cannot try to reform it. Reform doesn't work. We got to shut it down. Take the U.S. Department of Education, shut it down. Take $80 billion of that money they're spending. Return it back to parents, to teachers. Parents, let's start with that across this country. So every kid can actually go to where they're best served going to school. Parents can determine where they send their kids to school, rather than being trapped in a ghetto known as their zip code in many cities across this country. That's what it's going to take. You cannot incrementally reform it. Take Betsy DeVos and put her on top. No, that doesn't work. She's a nice enough person. Doesn't matter. Shut it down. That's the answer. That's what it's going to take. And our America First movement, it doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Trump. It started with George Washington. But it belongs to you, to us, the people of this country. That's what it's going to take to revive our republic, to revive our economy. The Fed is part of that administrative state. If you take one thing away from my approach to the federal government, it is this: shut it down.
Yep.
That's what it's going to take to win this war. It takes a president who knows the Constitution, so we're not going to be duped by that same swamp class of advisors that got us into this mess in the first place. And part of this is every politician. I've learned this year. It's a dirty lesson they may not teach you in school, but every politician now dances to the tune of their biggest donor. It's like a coin-operated machine. That's what it is. I'm not coin-operated. My biggest donor is me. My parents came to this country with no money in search of opportunity 40 years ago. I founded multi-billion-dollar companies. My wife, Apurva, she is a surgeon at Ohio State. She saves the lives of cancer survivors who need throat surgery to be able to swallow their food. That's what she does. That's why she's not here. She'll be a badass first lady, I'll tell you that. And I'm proud of her for it, but she's doing this with me too, because we need to save the life of this country. That's what's up. And if we don't do that in the next few years, I don't think we're going to have that country left. It starts with taking on the administrative state. The rest becomes easier if we get that part of the job done. Remind me your name again? You just told me.
John.
John. Good to see you. Probably time for one or two more, and then we'll get moving to it. Where's our next step?
We're going to Stewart.
Stewart.
Okay, so I have another question. Now this goes to foreign policy.
Sure.
I just heard last week or the week before, Congress passed a bill stating that no president can get us out of Iraq.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, it's out of NATO. They were saying
Yes.
this too. Out of NATO as well. So they're preparing for
Yeah.
someone with my foreign policy views to come to that White House. I mean, they don't love the stuff I'm saying on the campaign
How
trail.
is that? We're the taxpayers. We're the
That's
ones
right.
funding.
That's right. So I want people to understand what's going on. Our own money, right, that they're taking out of your wages, $20 an hour, you said?
That's all I make, yeah.
Well, some of that goes to the federal government.
Yeah.
And you know where that money's going? It's going to foreign aid
Yeah.
to countries who have less national debt per person than we do. That's a criminal waste of money.
Yes.
We're using our own hard-earned money so some kleptocrat in Ukraine can buy a bigger house.
Yeah.
That's what's happening today. $200 billion of our own money going to fight some other... It's not even fight some other nation's war. It's not even fighting their war. It's going to their own pockets. That's what they're doing. So on my watch, we will end foreign aid to any country whose national debt per person is less than ours, period. That's simple. That's actually 99% of our foreign aid goes to countries whose national debt per person is less than ours.
But see,
That's what it's going to take.
the other thing that I think I
And we pull out of the UN.
realize
We need to pull out of the
is
UN.
We need, as citizens of the United States, we need to start calling our representatives and our senators and telling
Yeah.
them this is wrong. That's the problem. Is nobody's speaking up.
Well, so I appreciate that spirit, John. I think there comes back to that deeper cancer. Those politicians in Congress right now, they're really just
Puppets.
puppets. Puppets for, pieces on a chessboard, some donors moving them along. You guys familiar with this carbon capture pipeline issue here?
Yes.
You are? They're they're effectively seizing the land of innocent farmers. You familiar with this issue? The CO2 pipeline? Yeah. So they're basically saying out of ethanol plants, you have to capture the carbon dioxide, put it in a pipeline buried under the ground. Many farmers don't want that crap in their backyard. They did it in Mississippi. There have been ruptures of these pipelines that have affected crop yield, sent people to the hospital. A good portion of a town went to a hospital when that happened in Mississippi. So a lot of farmers here are saying, I would not like that in my backyard. Thank you very much for your offer. And now they're saying they can use eminent domain to use it anyway. So leave a $50 check in your mailbox whether you like it or not. They're going to be building that across your land. Well, if they do that today for the carbon capture pipeline in the name of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, Today, if they can use that for eminent domain for carbon dioxide today, it's your cow tomorrow. It's your combustion engine vehicle the day after. They'll leave a nice little $50 check in your mailbox. That's the game they're playing. And so we have to say no to this assault on our basic constitutional rights, including our basic property rights, which is a deeper assault on our sovereignty.
Right.
That's what this is about, assault on our sovereignty. And the worst part is our own taxpayer money is used to do it. The people who are building that pipeline, they're collecting subsidies from the federal government. Where's that subsidy coming from? Out of your $20 check that you're earning here so that some other farmers in front of yours has his land taken from him. That's the corruption in the United States of America. It just needs to stop. Our own money is going to pay for the UN, foisting on us a climate change agenda. They're not applying those shackles to China, they're applying it to the United States. This is about our sovereignty. We are sovereign as the United States of America. We are sovereign as individuals. That's what's at stake right now in the United States, is our sovereignty itself. That's what the central bank digital currency is about. That's what the Federal Reserve's at the is about. That's what the administrative state, that fourth branch of government, is about. The people who we never elected to run the government. They're the ones actually running the government. So I take your point about calling the congressmen, but they're puppets. The people really pulling the strings are the permanent state, the deep state, the actors who were never elected to those positions in the first place. That's the bad news. The good news is the next president can actually address it. If there's one thing I know how to get done, it is to shut it down. That administrative state. It takes a president who comes in from the outside with sharp elbows. I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman. I know how to get that done. If somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you.
Okay.
It means you work for them, and I refuse to be that person. But also takes somebody, and Trump brought some element of that, but it takes somebody who also knows and understands the law and the Constitution deeply. And those two things don't usually go together, right? You might have the academic, nerdy law professor type over here. I've written 3 books in the last 2 years. They've been used in federal appellate court cases and everything else. That's fine. But you have the business type over here, the entrepreneur who can break things when necessary. Those two things don't usually go together in the same person. That's what pulls me into this race, my sense of duty to this country. I believe God gives each of us our own unique gifts. Every one of us has our unique gifts. But it's our job to use those gifts to do what's right in the short time that we're given, to fix our non-existent healthcare system. It's a sick care system that we have in this country. I mean, my wife, many of the procedures she performs, for some of them, she doesn't even get paid. Now, that works for our family because we've lived the American dream, and that's okay. You have a system that pays for pill-pushing behaviors from doctors. Why? Because the pharmaceutical industry lobbied for it. Why? It comes back to corruption. It comes back to the puppet masters that are pulling the strings.
That's why all the commercials we see on TV are for pharmaceutical products.
Exactly, or for presidential candidates paid for by their super PACs,
Yeah.
which is corrupt. And so I'm not playing that game. I don't report to them. I report to you, the people of this country. There's a reason why I'm the only person in this race who can say certain things. That CO2 pipeline's wrong. That it's based on a climate change agenda that absolutely is a hoax.
Yes.
Because it has nothing to do with the climate and everything to do with China. That Ronna McDaniel, the failed chairwoman of our party, needs to resign after 5 failed years of leadership. That I'll pardon, you're not supposed to say this, I'll pardon every peaceful protester from January 6th. Because it's the right thing to do for this country. Look at every one of those cases, case by case, to make sure justice is served.
Yep.
And you know what? I'd rather speak the truth and lose an election than to win by playing some snakes and ladders. But my bet is that's the winning strategy. That choice doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. So I know we probably got to go to our next stop, but what I'll say is this is, if you all do your part, take 15 minutes of your time, whether in Cedar Rapids or here. 15 minutes of your time to come to that Iowa caucus. Every one of your votes counts for the equivalent of 1 million people. That's the impact that Iowa has on the presidential election. And you're making the sacrifices to be a sheriff. You don't have to be doing what you're doing. You're doing it, I presume, because you care for your community and care for this state and care for this country. I'm asking you to do your part so I can do mine. 15 minutes of your time, and get 10 people who couldn't be here today, who are from this community. Get them to come too. Make your voice heard. The next generation often doesn't come out to that Iowa caucus. On average, it's about people 3 times to 4 times your age. Step up and make sure it's your generation that has $200,000 of national debt per person for each of you that you didn't sign up for. And if we're not careful, we're in World War III with somebody else's gun over your shoulder and trench fighting somebody else's war. That's what many people in this country, even in the Republican Party, are rooting for.
And if we're not careful, the next one might be here.
Exactly, because if you do enter World War III, our homeland is more vulnerable than it's ever been. If that can happen on October 7th in Israel, that can happen here in the United States. But my moral obligation, I'll tell you, as a father, it's to my family. As your next president, it is to you, the citizens of this country, not another. So if you guys do your part on that day, hear my word, my family and I, my wife, are poor enough. We're going to do ours to make sure that this American experiment doesn't end 250 years in. We got 250 years ahead of us. That's our job, and I believe, not in some cheesy politician way, but in a true way. I think our best days can actually still be ahead of us. I'm not going to tell you it's morning in America. That's the thing you're supposed to say. And I love Ronald Reagan. He was an excellent president because he did what he needed to do in his era, but it's not morning in America right now. But it can be. And I think if we do our jobs in the next 20 days here in Iowa, I'm going to do my job the rest of this race in the next 8 years of answering who we are. So several of you have come out to hear me before. Others we're meeting for the first time. But that's our deal. It's not going to be one political messiah coming from the White House to save us. If we're going to be saved, in our politics at least, not in the spiritual realm, but in the civic realm of our lives, if we're going to be saved, it's going to be because we save ourselves. Thanks,
And I
guys.
think
I appreciate you coming out.
we need to do it different this time, like they did. Ballot harvesting.
Oh, in the general election, we'll play to win. But it's got to be a landslide. 50.1 won't work. I'm actually going to make a prediction, you guys. I think we're going to win the Iowa caucus. We're going to bring a lot of non-traditional people, and we'll win the general for the same reason. We need to actually win by a landslide, and a landslide minus some shenanigans is still going to be a win. That's my
And
job.
like they say, is if Biden is the most popular president in American history and got the most votes of any president in history, why are they so afraid of Trump?
Yeah. Well, they're not going to let him get anywhere near there. So think ahead. Don't fall for their trap. Do your part.
We need your help.
Do mine.
So if each and every one of you would sign this caucus card our staff has, and sign up being precinct captain.
I did that in Adams.
If you've done it, that's fine, but if you want to do it again, just to make sure we got it, we appreciate that too.
That's probably the place we
All
will.
right, so please, sign one of these cards, and we appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. All the best. I want to make sure that you can actually have a future business that actually have a country.
Your sister, I think your sister stood up with Amy and her wedding.
Yeah. Be careful that carbon capture pipe. Don't let them get back.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do. Thank you for bringing your son too. I appreciate that for the next generation along. It's good to
Well, man,
good to see you.
really impressed.
Thank you. I appreciate
I'm
it.
talking to my boys, so
Thank you. I appreciate
we're the
it.
next generation, so
You spread the word.
I am.
Yeah, it's got it too.
Yeah, I am, so.
Thank you. I'm counting on it. Good seeing you, man. What year are you, senior? Good, like your dad. Good for you. We got your back. How you fight crime? You got to have people actually allowed to do their job without fear of being sued. We got your back. So let's come out that way. Be your first one. Thank you.
See you again.
Thank you. You didn't come together, did you?
Yes.
Oh, you did? Is your daughter? Oh,
Granddaughter. Oh my God. Good to meet you. Yeah. What was your name? You told me.
Sherry.
Sherry. I appreciate it, Sherry.
Did I grab a photo with you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can I help him? Here, I
I got it.
Ready?
I can get
Thank
it.
you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Real quick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.